Bubba Wallace here from 2311 Racing. Funny thing about being fast, you end up waiting a lot. First to show up, first in line, then just waiting. Me, I rev up Chumba Casino. With over 200 social casino games, no slow lanes here. Why sit around when you can spin? I'm already racing. Your turn. Play for free at ChumbaCasino.com. Let's Chumba.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 350 plus undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
Attention, you're listening to The Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here is your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Yes, my friends, for those of you who are quite astute, who have been students, listeners of this program for some time, you will have noticed that show intro is a little bit different. We cut a new one as we now have a sponsor of the Todd Huff Show, a studio sponsor. Welcome to Full Suite Wealth. We'll tell you more about that as things progress here with the program, but it's good to be here with you on this Friday. It's hard to believe. Time flies when you spend it with us here at the Todd Huff Show. It's good to be here. You know, I want to talk today. There's a lot of investigations. There's a lot of just political tension, turmoil. I think a lot of what has been going on for decades and decades has been exposed. The rats are scurrying along the ship, trying to find some places to hide, some corners, some places to operate in the shadows again. But the water levels are rising as their ship that they've been operating on is sinking, the deep state ship, and they are running out of places to hide, but yet they're still trying to hide. They're still trying to deceive us. And, my friends, and I know it's a lot. In fact, I was talking with Oz at the beginning of the program, actually before the program was starting here, and she said something to me. She said she'd stopped following some of the things that she follows. She's basically needs a break or has had enough of it. And it just intrigued me. And I'm sure that some of you in this audience feel that way as well. Just want to talk a little bit about that today because, listen, we've been pushing for changes in our government for a long time. And it's interesting to me, just psychologically, we think, wow, things have to improve. But sometimes when you think about it kind of in an intellectual vacuum, you don't realize the other side, the people who are benefiting from what we had are not just going to say, well, we had a good run and just peacefully go about their business. There's going to be one heck of a fight. I've talked about this on this program for some time now. I've shared with you that the left is not going to give up one metaphorical inch of ground, not the slightest bit of concession at all, without one heck of a fight. And that's what we're witnessing here today as we're looking at the investigations, the announcements, the criminal referrals. It's a lot to take in. I get it. I understand. And we're going to talk about that today. That's where we're headed, and I appreciate you tuning in to the program today. So before I do that, my friends, I want to tell you that a large retail store You may have heard this has happened to MyPillow now a couple of times, but a large retail store just canceled a very large order, leaving MyPillow with a lot of extra MyPillows. But that is your potential gain, my friends, because since they canceled that large order, MyPillow is offering the Classic Collection for wholesale prices for only $19.98. That you can get a standard MyPillow, but it gets a little bit better than that as well. For a limited time, they're going to offer their entire Classic Collection at wholesale prices. Queen size MyPillows for just $24.98. You can upgrade to king size for $29.98. You can get body pillows for $39.98. Multi-use MyPillows for $12.98. Go to mypillow.com. Use promo code Todd to take advantage of that wholesale pricing. And, my friends, receive $100 in free digital gifts courtesy of MyPillow when your order is $75 or more. So, mypillow.com, promo code Todd will get you those specials. All right, for a long time now, I've shared with you, you know, and the picture that I've painted, the way that I look at it, is that, we had just a quick summation, a summary of of how we got here. Just a really, really quick, high-level view. This country, when we were founded, was revolutionary, right? For the first time, we had a nation that sought its independence. It got its independence. And the people that led that movement of independence, that fight to break free from an oppressive, tyrannical government, they did not in turn say, now it's our turn to be the boss. Let's do the same thing that these other knuckleheads were doing to us. The founders did not do that. Now, the founders, as you all know, were not perfect. In fact, the biggest, most egregious problem we have in the history of this country when it comes to how it was founded was the issue of slavery. We have made this abundantly clear. This was, it eventually got fixed because the system that they built allowed for it to be fixed, but it was terrible thing that was compromised, was part of this nation's founding. So I'm not including that in this conversation when I talk about the greatness of this country. What I'm talking about are these ideas. You're citizens and not subjects. You have rights that are given to you not by the government, but by Almighty God himself. These things are revolutionary ideas that are good for people to be able to live under and experience this side of heaven. These are wonderful things. Prosperity ensued. Freedom allowed basically the top to be blown off this country. And certainly we were blessed as well with things in this land and protection with two large oceans keeping us away from most of the war around the world and so forth. A lot of good things that the United States benefited from and was blessed by. But this nation over time is always the case. This is always the case. The human nature is for people to seek power. Power is something that humanity just longs for, power and control. And so our founders they knew this, they built a system that said we want to make it as hard as possible for something like what we experienced with the tyrannical king of England. We want to avoid that, try to keep that from happening, make that not happen as much as possible. And so they set up a system of checks and balances. They didn't just establish a king. They had a Congress. They had a bicameral. We have a Congress that's broken into two parts. There's the Senate, the upper chamber, the House of Representatives, the lower chamber. There is, of course, the executive branch. There is the judiciary. And, of course, there are checks and balances within the Constitution. They took the time to put the Bill of Rights in the Constitution, which articulated some, but certainly not all, of the rights retained by the people. Acknowledged by our founders that these were just some of the liberties, some of the freedoms that were bestowed upon us, upon all people, by Almighty God himself, and we wanted to make sure that the government knew that that was not their business. There was a very specific task given to each, or a series of tasks, responsibilities given to each branch of government. Our founders did as much as they could, to prevent government from becoming oppressive and tyrannical. But what happens is you have, over time, the early generations of this country, they saw firsthand. They knew the stories. Some of them were present at the time of great tyranny that they were living under. And so the stories were much more real to the people. Then over time, this nation, because it was built upon some very, very good foundations, prospered greatly. And when people are prosperous, it's easy to become apathetic. And over time, that's what happened. We became apathetic. We didn't hold our government to the same standard that we once, as the early colonists, early Americans would have done, because, listen, they just been through it. They had been through it, and they knew, look, we're not going to repeat these mistakes. We are very, very critical of the people who are in office, and we're going to make sure that we remain a free people. And over time, I think that that's deteriorated. Plus, we're many generations removed from that period of time now. And many of us, as Rush used to teach on his program, history begins in our minds, the day we were born. That's the case for a lot of people. And so, hey, everything's always been fine. Why wouldn't it be? But you look at the grand scheme of what's happened throughout the course of history, and you can see that governments have been repeatedly tyrannical and oppressive. War and famine and poverty, many times caused by these leaders of countries, governments, and so forth. That has been a very prevalent, repeated sort of thing throughout history. And so over time, though, we've become a little bit apathetic, and we had seen prosperity, and we watched as the standard of living increased. And, people get bored. That's another thing that happens, I think, just in a natural sense. People get bored. You have to, in order to dream up some of the problems that we think we have in this country today. For example, all the stuff with the transgenderism. The only type of society that can really develop a movement like that is a society that is so overwhelmingly prosperous that you can sit on your backside all day and pontificate and think up things to be offended by, to think up things that you want to be upset about and protest and so forth. We are so prosperous that people can now have careers. They get paid to talk about these things as though they're legitimate. Listen, I'm not saying no one can have a problem or question. That's not my point, and it's not to ridicule and mock those who are genuinely confused and don't feel a certain way. That's not my point here. It's not my point. My point is to say that God created them male and female, and that it's an either-or thing, and it's determined genetically. But we've got people now who have careers over going around speaking and teaching about this, or even worse yet, involved in medical procedures or giving people drugs or hormones or whatever to try to change their body chemistry, even though that's not ultimately possible. Nonetheless, this is the sort of thing. Another way that I often illustrate this is I think about the sports industry, and I'm amazed. We are so prosperous as a people. Not only do we have sports, we pay people to entertain us by playing sports, and I'm not here to criticize that. I do think we've overvalued that as a society, the value that we've placed on that, but nonetheless, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. However, we've become so prosperous. Not only do we have sports entertainment, we have people who talk about sports. There's sports talk radio or sports talk in general. Again, not knocking it, but now you have people who make sometimes a very fantastic living to talk about issues of sports entertainment. Then on top of that, we have fantasy sports. You have fantasy sports where you can, and again, if this is your thing, I'm not here to criticize it. I'm just here to say this is how prosperous of a nation that we've become. And I'm trying to explain why some people have become apathetic, because we've chased these other things. We've created things that our founders never dreamed about. Fantasy football. Again, not to criticize it. They didn't understand flight either. Not saying that these, again, you get the point. I'm just pointing out that we have people who make money to entertain us. We have people that make a good living to talk about the people who entertain us in sports media. We get people who make a lot of money about the fantasy aspect of the people who entertain us. What if this person was on this team and that person was on that team and all of that? Then we have people even further removed into this world of just pure entertainment and seemingly fantasy. You have people who have talk shows about the fantasy league so that you can put your again, I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying that is so far removed from the average way of thinking and the average life that the average person has lived on this planet throughout history. They were worried about food and water and clothing and their family and safety and tyrannical governments and famines. They're worried about getting through the day. I'm glad that we're not there like that collectively as we once were. I'm just explaining that apathy is something that has taken over or taken a big chunk of the American mind, because we've been so distracted by these other things and we've been so prosperous as a country. It reminds me of the gleaners in the Old Testament. You know, you would have people that would pick crops out of the field. You'll read about this if you read the story of Ruth. And people were picking the crops, and there were people that they allowed to come and pick the crops, that the harvesters had dropped just on the ground. They didn't get everything. And people were allowed to do that. And I only point that out to say it's so prosperous, this nation's so prosperous, that the cup is running over in so many ways. And yes, I know that we had a previous administration that put holes in the cup, but this fundamentally, what this nation is built upon is it allows for this great level of prosperity, which, by the way, capitalism and prosperity has done more to help people in need than any socialist utopian program ever dreamed up and concocted. But that's another story for another day. But you've got this situation that creates apathy, right? We've all got things that consume us or that we're distracted by, and they're not all bad, right? We're busy. If you've got kids, you know what that's like. If you're, if you've just started a career, or just things can take over your time very quickly. And that's maybe something that we should address. But be that as it may, we kind of live in our own worlds. I remember before my father-in-law passed, he had told me, as he was approaching retirement, actually after he had retired, he had said, look, when I was working, I was focused on providing for my family. You know, his kids were involved in sports. A couple of them participated in college athletics. So he was going to games and cross-country events or track meets or whatever he was doing. He was working. He had saved up, money, allowed them to go to school, all that sort of stuff. And he said, I retire, my kids grow up, and they move out, start families on their own and all that stuff. And I start to realize, the heck is wrong with this country, right? He starts watching the news and he realizes, I didn't even think about that for the 30 or 40 years I was living and working in that sort of life. And I think that's the case for a lot of people. And so we've fallen asleep, maybe not you specifically, but a lot of us collectively had fallen asleep. And in that time when we were in that sleep, that state of just, distraction or focusing on getting the kids, raising kids or preparing them for college or whatever it is, starting a new career, starting a business, we look up and we realize what happened, because this is not the same government that existed when I was a kid. It wasn't the same government that I was taught about in civics class. This is something altogether different. Right? I got people that have been in office for half a century telling me that they're a public servant. They come into office with a few $100,000 and they leave multimillionaires. What is going on here? And then you factor in specifically what we've seen happen to President Trump, to conservatives. You look at the size and scope of the government that's grown, the deep state, as we call it, the bureaucratic state. You see some of the things that have been done throughout history. I go back to 1973, Roe versus Wade. There is no reason that was ever a decision made by the Supreme Court. They made it up out of whole cloth. It's not the job of the court to make up that stuff. It's the job of Congress, or it's the job of the states. It's not the job of 9 old white men. Yes, 9 old white men told women what they could do with their bodies in 1973 in the Roe decision. Just totally made it up. Out of thin air. Just poof, made it up. And that became, quote unquote, the law of the land. That's just one tiny example. We've watched as the Constitution has been trampled on for a long, long time, yet now we're told that Trump is the threat, the existential threat to this country, to our democracy. But in reality, my friends, and I know that there are some that will not hear this, and that's fine. But I am certain, I am convinced of this. The people in our government who fear Trump the most are the ones who have been the real threat and danger to our quote-unquote democracy, as I would say our constitutional republic, to our liberty, to the founding principles, to our prosperity, to our ability to make a living and to live as free people. The people that are inside our government who are attacking and going after Trump the hardest, in my estimation. Now, some of them just don't like him, I get it, but a lot of those folks have been involved in some really bad things, and they themselves have been the danger. So, that's what we have to remember when we think about what is happening now. To think that we were just going to win a few elections and change a couple of laws, and then suddenly everything would just work out and they weren't going to push back. That's just simply crazy talk, my friends. So, friends, I've got to take a break here in a moment. Before I do that, though, let me remind you about Freedom Marketplace. FreedomMarketplace.net. It is your online directory for conservative businesses that are pushing in the same direction that you are, my friends. These are businesses that have signed a pledge, a promise to me as the one who puts together Freedom Marketplace, but also to you, the user. It's totally free to use it, but their promise to you is that they do not support leftist candidates or leftist causes. They are pushing in the same direction you are. Check it out today. FreedomMarketplace.net. Again, that's FreedomMarketplace.net. Liberty and business for all. Quick time out, my friends. Back here in just a minute.
With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 350 plus undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
Welcome back, my friends. I mentioned off the top of the program, you may have noticed that our new intro had changed. That's because we have a new studio sponsor called Full Suite Wealth, and I want to tell you just a little bit, introduce you to them today. So, Full Suite Wealth is here to help you when your financial world starts getting a little bit more complicated. When you need something that's a little bit more than a one-size-fits-all sort of feedback and advice. That's where Full Suite Wealth shines. Their team specializes in working with families and individuals at your level, offering personalized guidance that goes far beyond the basics, from private equity and private credit to options, strategies, and coordinated legal planning. Full Suite Wealth helps you see the big picture and make confident decisions about your legacy. That's a term you'll hear them use a lot, your legacy. It's all about having a dedicated team to guide you every step of the way so that you can focus on what matters most, your family, your goals, your future. Want real confidence in your financial life? Visit fullsuitewealth.com. Build your legacy, secure your future with Full Suite Wealth. So, want to welcome them to the program, introduce them to you to them to you, and remind you that this is now the Full Suite Wealth studio as well, and you'll hear me talk about that from time to time. All right, that being said, let's get back to this. When I left last segment, we were talking about kind of the background of how we got here. Really, the American people as a whole had abdicated their responsibility. You know, after the Constitutional Convention, you remember the famous question Benjamin Franklin was asked, "Sir, do we have a republic?" What was it? Basically, do we have a republic? What was it? I forget the exact question. And he said, "We have a republic as long as you keep it that way." So we have this wonderful thing, but we have a response. It's just not a given, right? We have to hold these clowns and knuckleheads accountable. We shouldn't just trust these people. I talk about this. I did a TED Talk not long ago about this. Why do people trust government just inherently? Somebody says, "I'm with the fill in the blank, FBI, CIA, DHS, whatever." And everybody's like, "Cool, man. You're part of the government. I can trust you." But yet, if someone says, "I'm an executive at Walmart," or whatever, people think, well, you're evil. You're trying to profit off of, selling food or whatever it is. And there's this hatred towards profit. Where do you think government gets its money from? Do you think if we didn't run a profitable country, that if people didn't actually prosper, that there'd be enough money to operate this government? And by the way, where do you think these people that work in government come from? They come from one of two places. They're either lifetime people who don't have the slightest idea about how the real world works outside of Washington, D.C., or they're people who have been successful in the business world that are then plugged into these agencies and places within our government. Yet, if they work in the business world, people look at them with skepticism, think that they're the problem and so forth. But if they are suddenly the same person who gets a job in government, some people think that is enough to make them trustworthy for life, I suppose. It just defies common sense to me. We have to hold these people accountable. In the free market, in the business world, you can vote with your dollars. We talk about that when we talk about Freedom Marketplace. You can vote with your dollars. If you don't like a particular company, you don't like their products, you don't like how they do something, you don't have to do business there. But you have to do business with your federal government. It's inescapable. You're going to have to do it. And that's why it's important that we stay vigilant and hold these jokers and clowns accountable and make sure that they're not doing something that the Constitution doesn't permit. The problem is they have blown so far past that, the average person doesn't understand what it should look like. And so it's with that in mind that we think we have these elections. We have Trump winning in 2016. That's where, we're talking about the Russian collusion delusion. That's where we're talking about Obama, the Obama administration deliberately trying to make sure that Trump is not able to be an effective president, to be able to act upon or implement his agenda that he was elected to do, they interfered with our democracy. I saw an article today, which I mentioned this yesterday or the day before. We did not have a peaceful transfer of power when Obama handed the reins to Trump. They tried to undermine. It wasn't just political differences. They tried to throw obstacles in his way. I've been through this extensively on this program. And so the things that these folks have been doing in our nation's capital, as I've laid out, as they've grown their power, they've grown their pocketbooks, they've expanded their retirement, they've taken more control over you. By the way, anytime they have more power, more control, that means less liberty. Anytime they have more power, that typically means they have more money. More money there means less money in your pocketbooks. They've tricked some people into saying, we'll just target the wealthiest Americans and stick it to them and make them pay for it. But again, that money's coming out of the private economy and it's going into the government where it's wasteful. I'm not saying that the government shouldn't have any money, but it has way more than it should, and it is abused its spending. It has engaged in fraudulent activity. It's a mess what's happened. DOJ has exposed some of this. Congress is now implementing some of this into law, which is fantastic to see this sort of stuff with these rescissions bills, which we had the first one that's been taken care of. The second, there's others that are supposed to be coming. This is what it's going to look like. But to think that the opposition, the people who have been building this system, especially when you factor in that to them, government is God. Hear me say that. Let me pause and say that again. To the people who are benefiting from this system, the people in what I would call the deep state, the bureaucratic state, the swamp, whatever you want to call it, these people are benefiting greatly, and they view government as God, as their religion. And they believe that they're justified to have this power and authority over you and over me. And they're not going to go down without a fight. That's the point. I said this back in 2016, before Trump was elected. The idea that these people are just going to roll over and quit fighting is absurd. That's absolutely what's going to happen. They're going to fight. And I said this in the context of people in 2016, they would say, I remember this conversation, people would say, I can't wait until this campaign is over so that things can get back to normal. And I used to kind of chuckle and say, man, you are living in a different world. That is not what's happening here. One of these two sides is going to have to win. This is going to be a fight until somebody wins, until we either rein in the government or the government gets so big that we're no longer able, heaven forbid that happens, but we're no longer able to fight back. And we got dangerously close to that, my friends. Very, very dangerously close. And I think COVID and the way that was handled may be exhibit A in what I mean by that. But that is what's been happening. And the idea that after the election we can just go back to normal is just crazy, especially if these things that have been alleged to have been happening. These things have to be addressed. They have to be dealt with. If Obama was literally interfering, making up intelligence reports to prevent the current president, the current president at that time, Trump, or the incoming president, from being able to implement his agenda, how is that not sabotaging our democracy, my friends? How? Tell me. I remember I shared this with you the other day briefly. Harry Reid was actually out there in the media in 2016, 2017, claiming that Trump should be given fake intelligence briefings, not real intelligence briefings by the intelligence community when he was president. Because he was, I guess, the argument goes, an asset of Russia, probably feeding intelligence to Putin. That was the argument. This entire narrative has collapsed. The entire narrative has collapsed. And we have a choice now. And this is where it gets sticky, and I understand why people get tired of this. But if you want your country back, my friends, you're going to have to fight for it. The other side sure isn't just going to give it up. But the context absolutely matters. And the people who have been doing these things need to be held accountable. And we have to make sure that the opportunity to do this never exists. So much of it is up to us to be able to do that. We have to make sure that this sort of thing never happens again. And there's all these investigations where there's opportunities to at least hold people accountable, if not close some of these loopholes that prevent these things from happening to the best of our ability. I have to take a break, my friends. Back here in just a minute.
How to have fun anytime, anywhere. Step 1. Go to ChumbaCasino.com.
ChumbaCasino.com. Got it.
Step 2. Collect your welcome bonus.
Come to Papa welcome bonus.
Step 3. Play hundreds of casino-style games for free.
That's a lot of games. All for free?
Step 4. Unleash your excitement.
Woohoo!
Chumba Casino has been delivering thrills for over a decade. So claim your free welcome bonus now and live the Chumba life. Visit ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome back, my friends. Final segment of the week. I can hear the weeping and the screaming and the crying as I speak. I get it, my friends. I know it's tough. You can always, by the way, go to our website, toddhuffshow.com, listen to archives of this program, maybe check out some Todd Talks you may have missed. But I know it's tough. We'll be back on Monday, but hey, I get it. Friends, think about this. Your investments are like seeds that you plant. They grow, they multiply, but are they bearing the kind of fruit that you want? At 4-8 Financial, they believe your money should reflect your values. They specialize in wealth management and biblically responsible investing, screening out companies that do not align with your faith. It's all part of their Purpose Center financial planning, helping you live a life of meaning and purpose. And so they can help you with your investment portfolio, your mutual funds, your stocks. And if you want to know if your current investments, what you have in your retirement, your mutual funds, your 401k, Roth, if you want to know if those are aligned with your values today, all you have to do is go to 48financial.com/Todd, and you can take the assessment right then and there. It's easy to do. I did it. You can as well. Again, 48financial.com/Todd. 48 Financial, they're here to worry about your money so you don't have to. All right, so all of these investigations, and I'm just going to touch a little bit because we don't have a lot of time. I'm going to touch a little bit on what we're talking about. We've already mentioned and spent some time talking about the criminal referral and Obama and what they did with this fake Russian collusion stuff, and where does that go? Also out there, there's talks about revisiting the Hillary Clinton email saga. And just, I think yesterday, it could have been Wednesday, the House Intel chair, no, that's a different headline. So it's still the House Intel chair. I had to go to another story. His name is Rick Crawford from Arkansas. He says, look, Russia gathered some dirt on Hillary Clinton, and they found that she was, again, allegedly taking tranquilizers. She had mood swings and extreme outbursts. Russia apparently found this out, and they had actually hoped, again, according to his report, according to what they have found, Russia had hoped that Hillary had won in 2016 because they were going to use her use allegedly of tranquilizers and all this sort of stuff to blackmail her. This is the sort of thing that happens. See, this is a lot easier to explain than some Russian social media strategist over there in the Kremlin coming up with a social media ad that tricks Hillary voters into voting for Trump. This is a lot more logical. Russia has information not on Trump, according to what we're finding now, what we're hearing now. Russia wanted Hillary because they thought, look, if we were in a situation where Russia, they say, look, we need this. And they say, Madam President, if you aren't, agreeable to this, we might have to let the American people know some of these things. This is why the stuff with the fairs and the Monica Lewinskys and the JFK scandals, that's why these things are so ultimately dangerous, is because people in positions of power don't want to be humiliated. They don't want their families humiliated. They don't want to be exposed as being some sort of a fraud. That's why Biden being president and this alleged scandal with Hunter and pay-to-play stuff, that's why the Clinton email stuff, ultimately, yes, there's the corruption factor, which is a big deal, but you also have that information being used to influence leaders to do things that maybe they wouldn't normally or absolutely shouldn't do in some cases to avoid being embarrassed. And so there's investigations like this that are out there as well. So I know we are 6 months into Trump's second term. There's going to be a whole lot more of this. House Republicans officially subpoena Epstein's partner, Ghislaine Maxwell, to testify before their committee. There's reports about Obama knew exactly what I told you about Hillary. He knew that when he was saying that Russia was trying to get Trump to win. The House GOP is moving to investigate the January 6th feds and the J6 committee. There's an article talking about that in the stack of stuff. We've got Marco Rubio, the State Department, launching a national security investigation into Harvard's visa program. Folks, there's just a lot of stuff out there. Of course, Tulsi Gabbard saying that the media is complicit. Of course they were in the Russian collusion hoax. Folks, there's so much, and it's going to get even more intense. The idea that these folks are just going to improve their way of operating or change their behavior is just simply not going to happen. They're in a fight for the survival of what they've built in the deep state. Folks, I got to go. Have a wonderful weekend. SDG.
Riley Herbst from 2311 Racing here, and you know what grinds my gears? Waiting for coffee. But instead of counting frappes and lattes, I fire up Chumba Casino. No apps, no fuss, just fun social casino games to pass the time. By the time my coffee's ready,
Order for Riley.
I've already taken a few victory laps. Next time you're stuck waiting, make it entertaining. Play for free at ChumbaCasino.com. Let's Chumba.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.